Hello, how are you? One question. How much time does it take to come from Guatemala City to Antigua? Too long. How much time? 2 hours, 3 hours? Well, usually if you were driving at 3 a.m., probably will take you 40 minutes. But if you come like in Sunday, for example, that could take you even 3 hours or more. So we are going to talk about that. Welcome, Assaf. Assaf is from Israel and he's living in New York. And we are waiting for Diego Cuestas. I think that he's trapped in the traffic.
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. Emilio, sorry. The traffic jam was impossible. I barely made it on time.
Let's give Diego a big applause. This is something, that is happening more and more. We are wasting a lot, not only of time, and money, but mental health. So what we are going to be talking this morning is something that is related to all of us, not only in Guatemala, not only New York or Colombia. It's mobility. It's a big issue worldwide. And we are here to talk about solutions. Very straightforward. So I'm going to start with Assaf. He's a creator of an initiative called Super Pedestrians, and he has been working on solutions. So why don't we start by understanding the problem? Because the thing is that in last century, we became fascinated by cars. And cars took space, took money, took a lot of our aspirations, and now we know a lot of things that we didn't know at that time. And I feel very optimistic by that, by the amount of knowledge that we have now as opposed to what we knew back then. And the big question is, what are we going to do with this knowledge? How can we put it into value? So to understand the problem, Assaf, when we talk about mobility, are we talking about cars? Are we talking about building systems to facilitate people to move to different places? Are we talking about demand? Are we talking about supply? Where is the core of the problem when we talk about mobility?
Thank you. Thanks, Emilio. Hi, everybody. I think it's a really important question because as a citizen of a city, we see mobility from the standpoint of the personal experience. I stood in traffic 4 hours in Guatemala City, for example, one day, so to speak. That to me, that's the problem. I wish there were more lanes that would solve, for me, traffic. I see traffic as a problem. But the issue is, and I assume here that there's a lot of entrepreneurs, maybe policymakers, maybe members of the industry. The issue is that what we know today is that it all starts from how much supply you have. And the problem of a city like Guatemala City and many other cities around the world, almost every city is dealing with this issue, is that our cities are constructed in a way that creates the need to move, right? So think of, let's take, for example, Beijing. Beijing in the 70s, right, before the middle class exploded over there in the last 20 years, people lived above where they worked. Bicycle and walking were the predominant mode of mobility. The city was erased with the explosion of the middle class, rebuilt with tech centers and employment areas, and then areas where you sleep. And now you need to move from where you sleep to where you work. So the structure of the city created now demand for mobility that was not there. While the movement by bicycle and walking was almost erased. Still there, but almost erased. So problem is, number one, how do we limit the demand and maximize the supply? So adding lanes doesn't solve the problem, just makes people buy more cars and drive more. So we're going to talk today a little bit more in depth with this. The problem is a supply problem. Can we actually move more people on the street? Today our cars are so big, but they're empty. We move very few people, and it's still very slow and fully booked. Can we move with smaller cars? Can we move with mass transit that is enabling bigger throughput, like a subway or a BRT, like was recently implemented in Guatemala City? Can we increase those capacities? So from a framework perspective, let's think of this problem as a supply problem, not only from the personal experience perspective, which is, I wish this traffic would go away. It's not go away. The question is, can we keep moving more and more people?
Thank you. It's very interesting to understand the supply in a way that probably we hadn't thought of. You know, because if we are conscious that the bigger the supply of this incentive to use cars is, the more stuck we will be in the problem. So, Diego, what happened to cities like Guatemala City? You know, like in the 80s, it was very easy to move around, and people sometimes, you know, or many times would go back for lunch at home, and that seems so far away from the way we live now. Yes. What do you think has been like the core of this transformation that is killing our quality of life, I would say?
Yeah, I think for myself I was lucky because as I grew up, traffic became worse and I could no longer drive fast on the street. So I had to go car racing, and that was a lot safer than doing it on the street. So for me, it had a positive effect, let's say, as a joke. But traffic, we were saying problem, solution. We complain about traffic all the time, but if we just complain about it, we are part of the problem. We are not being part of the solution. So if we want to be part of the solution, I ask yourselves, are you in a related industry and you in government? And if you are, ask yourself, what are you doing to promote public transportation, metro, more buses, electric buses? What are you doing to promote that people live closer to where they work? Maybe you are not in government. Maybe you are a business owner, a general manager. If you are, ask yourself, what are you doing in your company to encourage part of your employees to work from home? If not every day, some days. Can they do it? How do they do it? Are you doing that? In my company, it's difficult for us to do that. What did we do? We encourage employees, to come on electric motorcycles. How do we encourage them? We have solar panels. We put free charging for the motorcycles. So we tell them, if you come to work on an electric motorcycle, you can charge it free of charge at the premises. So ask yourself, what can I do in my company to improve mobility for my city, for my employees? And as an individual, what can I do myself to improve it? I mean, can you walk to where you're going? Why not walk? Can you ride a bike? Ride a bike like in the video. That's beautiful, and it'll be a lot healthier also. I mean, okay, you cannot do that. Okay, can you drive then a smaller car, a taxi, a tuk-tuk? If you have to drive a car, could it be a smaller car? Do you need to drive a big car every day, or could it be a small one? And if it's either small or big, could it be hybrid? Can it be electric and do a lot less damage to the environment? So there's a lot of questions we can ask ourselves to do things better, government-wide, company-wide, personally-wise. So that's my message.
Okay, I think it's very interesting that we are not talking about cars, we are talking about mobility, and we are talking about different ways of using mobility. And when we talk about like walking, for example, the first thing that probably will come to our minds in Guatemala City is that we don't have the proper infrastructure to walk. It's not safe. It's
But can I interrupt there?
Yeah.
A lot of people I hear saying, I can't walk because it's not safe. I will get mugged. You will get mugged in your car more likely than if you're walking. So that's not I mean, I think that's an excuse that some people make, but I don't think it's real.
Yes, and I didn't want to go too deep into walking, because what I want to share this morning is the importance not just of one way of mobility, but to understand that we need to design a system that includes different ways where we can all move, not only as fast as possible, but also taking attention on the quality of the experience. Because I love to walk, and I think if I could choose, which way I could go to work to, probably walking would be the first one if I was close enough. But that's not the case, so then I would go for bikes. But then it comes the second question. There is not the right infrastructure to use bikes as your main way of mobility in Guatemala yet. So if we are getting close to understand that mobility is not about only cars, but it's about designing a system that we don't have yet, but we need to build. And when we understand that to be or to have that system, we need to work together with government and to make them do what they have to do. And this brings us to public policies. And you were saying that, it's not like enough to complain. That really doesn't help. What we need is to understand the problem, to design a system, and to incorporate the government in a way that there is enough critical mass of people, thinkers, pushing what it has to be done. And in that order, Assaf, from your perspective, where do you think we should be learning? Where in the world do you think you have a good reference of what Guatemala and other cities should take into account and should consider what's happening and how they move from where they were to where they are now?
So if we sort of frame the problem really as a supply problem, before we look at examples, it gives a framework for judging whether a solution makes sense. Let's take autonomous vehicles. We've heard about it for a couple of decades, and many people think it's going to be the solution to safety problems and to traffic. But actually, really, is it going to necessarily increase supply? Probably not. It's probably going to increase demand. It's going to be very cheap. A blind person can drive, which is amazing, right? On the other hand, my 8-year-old daughter could go to school alone in a car. We could have bedrooms on wheels. It's going to increase demand. Lowering cost, increase demand. So it's not solving the supply problem necessarily. However, if we make small shared autonomous vehicles, all of a sudden you've freed up parking and you can move a lot more people through the same width of a street without adding lanes. You can use the space of the street for places for pedestrians to interact with the rest of the streetscape instead of building more car lanes. But if we take a step back for a second, again thinking of the supply problem, it starts from land use. How do you design the city? As Guatemala develops now, and it's developing rapidly, I know there are many issues along the way, but through that development process, where you put the areas that in the city where somebody lives, works, and spends time with their friends and loved ones is the beginning of traffic, right? What we talked about earlier. So making sure that it's as mixed as possible, so you live above your office, above a restaurant, that's the best, right? And to put it simply. Then number 2 is, how do we mix between mass transit, like the transurbano system that is in Guatemala City? How do we connect the rapid bus, the BRT system, to a light mobility mode? Maybe electrified tuk-tuks, right? Don't get rid of them. They're great. They're small. They take very little space. Just make them cleaner and maybe connect them with software. Maybe predict where demand is so that you can have the right amount of tuk-tuks next to the BRT stop, given where people go. There's software that can do that today. I'll show some of that later in my talk this afternoon. So I think thinking of these types of interconnected systems that take into account A, what we have, B, the structure of the city where people sleep, where people work, and also using software to connect it is the most promising solution to increase supply while making a place more livable, the air cleaner.
Okay, it's very interesting to understand that if we design systems that are not interconnected, we are not solving the problem. It's not enough to write a bike lane. That doesn't help. That doesn't solve the problem. We need to think systemically, and we need to weave the whole perimeter of the place that we want to cover and understand that people will have the different infrastructure accessible to move, walking, biking, using public transportation. So I think that we are coming to a point in Guatemala where we are understanding that the road that we were taking is not taking us to where we want to go. And that's a great advancement, because it's a realization that something that seems so natural and logical, it's not. And it's making our lives, our daily lives, very complicated. So in that way, we have moved. And also, we have moved in the sense that we have to work together with government, which is not easy. And, but we have to learn. I mean, there is no option. So, in your experience, Assaf, what would be the best way to accelerate this process of working together with the public sector?
There's a very nice example of from the government in Cape Town. They had a history of segregation there until apartheid was taken down. And still, a decade and a half afterwards, you had the City Bowl, where most people work, 800,000 people, disconnected from two big neighborhoods, Kailicha and Mitchell's Plain. 1.5 million and about 1 million, I believe. Altogether, around 2 million people outside the City Bowl, needing to come to work over in the City Bowl. That's where the money is, that's where the work is. And they had a very developed, let's call it ecosystem of freelance taxis, little minibuses that would take people on demand to where they want to go. Now, they implemented this BRT system, just like there is here in Guatemala City, to connect a Kailicha with a City Bowl, this big shanty town with a City Bowl. And there was a mutiny of the minibus drivers. They were like, okay, you're taking away my job, and they would really go against it. So what the city did was give them stake, literally equity, shares in a sort of a public-private partnership that is managing the BRT. So yes, you're gonna lose a little bit of work here, but you have an upside, and you have vested interest in the success of this new transit system that's gonna be better for the people living in the remote areas. So that's one example of going from public to private that was successful, and I thought it's quite inspiring.
What do you think, Diego, that is our main challenge in Guatemala, to work together with the government? And how can we, work better at that?
It's hard. A lot of business people like myself, my company, normally we are happy to serve our private customers and just forget about the government. You don't want to get messy, right, with them. You were asking, what can we learn from other places? And I think the main thing we can learn from other places is that, because we are selfish individuals, humans, I mean, If I can drive a car, I will probably want to drive a car, and if I'm selfish enough, I will keep driving my car to work because it's convenient, it's comfortable, I can choose when to go, when to arrive, etc. But if we all do that, then we end up where we are now, right? So what they have done in other cities is just great public transportation. I mean, it's safe, it's fast, it's convenient, you can work while you transit, and you get there faster. And at the same time, these cities sometimes without even wanting to, or sometimes on purpose, they make it difficult for you to have a car. Parking is expensive, it's hard to find. Some cities don't allow you to go in at certain times with a car. So what I mean is, they encourage you enough to quit using your car and start using public transportation. So what we can learn from them is that public transportation is indeed the most efficient way. So we have to push the government, we have to ask for it publicly. If we are in a position to, let's say, to make a difference, do what we can to get a lot more public transportation. I think city municipality in Guatemala say that we are missing at least 3,000 buses in the city. I think it's twice that. We're missing a lot of buses just to move people around, not to mention if we could have a metro, that would be a dream come true. So we gotta push and dream towards that. In Panama, we see a metro. A small country like ours, if they can do it, I mean, we can do it.
Who's taking the metro in Panama City? Raise your hand. A few hands. Okay. Knowing that building more roads for cars is not the solution, I have another question for Guatemalans, but I know that this is a question that also applies to many Latin American cities. How are we going to stop the public sector doing the things that is proof that is not solving the problem?
There's no one answer to this question, right? Clearly. And at the end of the day, you hope that the results prevail, right? If over time you repeat actions that don't lead to any improvement, I think there's not much more to add or say. The question is, can you vote out your government? And I know it's not as easy as it sounds, given recent developments here. So at the end of the day, I don't think there's a need to prove that one action works or doesn't. It's very, when it comes to mobility, maybe that's the best thing about it, because if you're talking about education or public health, you invest now, you see results in 30 years, and they're very hard to measure. Whereas mobility, you invest now, maybe you see results in 5 to 10 years, but they're very easy to measure, right? So I think that in that sense, it's not hard to show whether something works or not. The question is, how do you translate that later into politics? That I don't have an answer for you.
I would say keep pushing, because I mean, we try to accomplish easy things with the government sometimes. Like in Guatemala, we don't have emission controls. I mean, a car can just, or a truck can just pollute like crazy with the exhaust pipe. No one's doing that. There's no yearly inspection to make sure that your car is not polluting the air more than it should. It's a simple solution, right? Every country does it, and we've been trying to accomplish that the government does that for us, for Guatemalans, for a long time. I'm talking about the car industry. We're pushing for that for a long time, and we can't get it done. So, and it's an easy thing to fix. And what we're discussing in this panel are, let's say, much more complex systems to fix. But I think what we gotta do is keep pushing, keep trying, and don't get discouraged, because if we do, then it'll not happen for sure. If we keep pushing, we have a chance.
Yeah, and the challenge is to keep pushing together, you know. Otherwise, a lot of energy, you know, will be wasted. We are coming to an end. This is a fascinating topic, because it has to do with our daily life. And I think that at the end of the day, that's very important, you know, to go back home and feel it was a good day. But it's very hard to go back home when you have spent 2 hours, you know, trying to move 5 kilometers. And this is the reality that many people are going through every day. So we are at a point where we know what is not solving the problem, and we are starting to understand that it's not one solution, it's some of different applications at the same time that need to be operated in a way that integrates the public system with the private system and with citizens. So if the mayor of Guatemala City and the mayors of the main capitals in Latin America were here, what would be your best piece of advice to them?
Two things. One, land use, what we spoke about earlier. Do not build those industrial parks and separate work from where people live. Minimize that. And number two, investment in mass transit. And these are this is nothing new. However, there's a nuance, because at a place where there's so much entrepreneurial activity like Guatemala, there's a way to engage the private sector, especially at the nodes, at the periphery of the mass transit system. How can you have a digitized version of those tuk-tuks that we talked about? How can you have an engagement, maybe even on the neighborhood scale, that would create, an offering of a trip that combines multiple types of vehicles, multiple modes, and replace your trip in a private car? We can do that. Now you're increasing supply and reducing traffic.
It's very interesting when you see it like in a simple way, and you realize that the use of land is extremely important on what type of results we're going to have in mobility. But I think that Guatemala, for many years, was fascinated by this model of suburbia, and we went into that illusion of thinking that we are going to live in these, gardens and woods, and that's how we have built some interesting models that have to be very present at the present moment and for future projects. Because we have, for example, Carretera El Salvador, which I think is a great example of how an area that was very close to the city, it was beautiful, it was like Northern California, full of woods, mountains, hills, water, rivers, very close to the city. And in the 80s, we tried to convert that area into a residential area without the proper planning. And Carretera El Salvador ignited a new generation of projects that are happening not only in Guatemala City, but now in a city near you, Antigua, for example, and the surroundings of Antigua. So what I would like to put, on the table is that we have a lot of information of what's working and what's not. So let's be very attentive to choose well what are we going to do from now on, and how are we going to use our power into the construction of what on the country and on the cities that we want to live in. I think that's very, very important, because when Diego was saying keep pushing, keep fighting, I think that we need to be very strategical, and we need to activate a collective intelligence that understands that this is a complex problem and needs the involvement and incorporation of all the sectors working together. But working together, having on account what's working and what's not working. Because otherwise we will be repeating ourselves and doing what we have done in the past and creating more, chaos of what could be, built if we were like much clear and aligned on what type of cities we want to build. Diego, a final piece of advice for Guatemalans. You are Guatemalan, you know how the system works in Guatemala, and here we have a fascinating mix of people from different generations, people who have power in their decisions. You have people from private sector here, you have citizens, you have some people from public service. So what advice would you give us as Guatemalans, to build that type of systems that we need?
Yeah, first of all, just acknowledge that it's a system. It takes a system, right? There's no single perfect solution. But on the personal level, what I said, I mean, if you can walk. If you can use the bicycle, use the bicycle. If you can do public transportation, if it's available in your area, use it. If you gotta go with your private car, okay, maybe a motorcycle is good for you. Maybe it needs to be a car. If you can make it electric, go electric. I mean, a combustion engine, 70% of the energy you put into it is wasted in friction and heat. Only 30% goes into actual movement. An electric motor, the losses are less than 10%. So it's just so much more efficient. So if you can go electric, go electric. So there's a lot of things we can do as individuals. And if all of us do a little bit of that, it'll make a big difference. Hard to accomplish, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. And my piece of advice is expose yourselves to your cities in different ways from what you have done in the past. And I think that when one starts, to go out of the house and walk and see things from that perspective, and take pictures, put attention to the trees, if there are any trees or if there are not, the change of temperature, how people behave in the public space, that will give you not only simple but very profound pieces of information to understand mobility at its core. So, very simple. Let's use the streets, regardless how good or how bad they are, and let's get connected with the public space. Because it's in the public space where citizenship really happens, So Antigua is a great example, and I love Antigua at 6 o'clock in the morning because it's very peaceful, and you can see a lot of things that we don't see when we come, for lunch or, and it's full of cars and the smell of gasoline. But let's get connected and let's give our kids the opportunity to be exposed to the public space if we want them to become good citizens. Thank you very much, Assaf. Thank you very much, Diego. This is a conversation that must remain open in our communities, in our sectors, in our homes, because the decisions that we will be taking from here on will affect our daily lives, and that's very important. And we have much, much power than what we think as citizens. So thank you very much, and we are ready for the next panel. Thank you.